There's a reason the Joker doesn't kill Batman. It's not really about mercy or incompetence. It's more so that without Batman, the Joker would stop existing. Think about it for a second. The Joker's whole identity, the chaos and the craziness, only really makes sense as a response to something. Take that something away, that being Batman, and the Joker has nothing left to be. I watched Megamind the other day and something really stuck out to me. Most people might watch it and see a villain who becomes a hero, or a funny movie about a blue guy with a forehead like KSI's. But if you looked deeper, you'd see what the movie is actually really about. Because here's the thing, Megamind never really chose to be a villain, and Metroman never really chose to be a hero either. The city of Metrocity looked at two kids and made a decision before either of them could say a single word, and then it spent the next 10 to 20 years making sure that that decision stuck with them. By the end of this video, you're gonna see something that most people completely missed. That Megamind and Metroman were never really opposites or enemies. They were just two people caught in the same trap, and the most surprising thing either of them did wasn't fighting each other, it was actually the moment they both tried to walk away. Okay, so most people probably remember the movie going something like this. Megamind is the bad guy who loses every fight. Metroman is the hero who wins every time. Until one day, Megamind actually beats Metroman and gets everything he ever wanted, or thinks he ever wanted, and then realizes that he doesn't know who he is without the fight. So he creates a hero called Titan. I don't know if it's Titan or Titan, but that experiment goes badly wrong, and Megamind has to step up and save the day. It's a classic redemption arc, and look, that reading isn't entirely wrong. That's basically what happens on the surface, so I'd get why people would walk away with that. But here's where it starts to fall apart. In the beginning of the movie, it shows two babies being launched into space from dying planets on the same night. Both pods are heading for the same mansion, and then Metroman's pod happened to suddenly bump Megamind's out of the way, making him land in a prison yard. Nobody chose that. One pod nudged the other, and that was the whole decision. The movie isn't necessarily about good versus evil. It's about two kids who got sorted before they had an idea of what was happening. And that sorting, the moment where the world points at you and says, hey, this is where you are, is where the real story starts. But here's the question the movie doesn't answer straight away. What happens when the person being sorted actually agrees with their verdict? As we all know, Megamind beats Metroman. He actually does it. The thing he's been trying to do and failing at his entire life, he finally gets it done. The city is his, Metroman is gone, and everything he ever wanted was delivered. But in all that victory, he was completely lost. He says it himself. We have it all, and yet we have nothing. And without Metroman, what exactly is the point? Now, a lot of people would hear that and think, hey, it's classic human nature, right? We achieve the thing that we always wanted, and then immediately feel empty inside. That's just how people work. But I think that reading is too easy because it misses exactly why Megamind felt empty. It's not just that he achieved a goal, but it's that the goal that was set out was never actually his to begin with. His whole identity, being a villain and a schemer, only existed in relation to Metroman. It was reactive. It was a performance that was written for an audience. And when Metroman disappeared, that performance had no one to play to, which is why he created Titan to fill that hole. He didn't become the villain because he looked deep inside of himself and found darkness. He became the villain because on day one, the world pointed at him and said, hey, you go there. And every single day after that, the school, the prison, the city, and the newspaper headlines, all of it constantly reflected on him and told him that he was the bad guy and that this is his role and he should stay in his lane. When your identity gets handed to you constantly from a young age at that, it doesn't feel like a role anymore. It just feels like this is who you are. And when the thing that defined your whole existence vanishes, you don't feel free, but you feel like you've stopped existing. And that's not a villain problem. That's what happens to anyone whose whole sense of self was built on something they never chose to be. But here's what's interesting, because the moment the role collapses, something unexpected filled the space. It wasn't darkness or freedom, it was something much more stranger, and it shows up in the last place that you would think: a museum, a disguise, and a conversation that he was never supposed to have. After defeating Metroman, Megamind was at his museum talking to his statue. Roxanne was also there doing the same thing, and he heard her, causing him to panic. He grabs the nearest disguise by dehydrating Bernard, who worked at the museum, and taking his form, and just starts talking to Roxanne, not as Megamind the villain, but as Bernard, a regular guy, someone she had no history with and also no reason to fear. It starts as a way out of an awkward situation, and that was it. Except that was not what happened next. What happens is that Megamind, inside Bernard's disguise, actually starts living. He starts talking to someone who doesn't know that he's the villain, someone who isn't seeing the blue skin and making up their mind before he opens his mouth. And something in him responds in a way that he wasn't prepared for at all. It gets to a point where he and Minion argue, and Minion says something that stopped the whole argument. He says, the bad guy doesn't get the girl, and that line says a lot, because it's not just Minion worrying about the plan, but it's more so about Minion reminding Megamind the rules of his role, which is him being the villain. And Megamind, for the first time in his life actually, pushes back and says, hey, maybe I don't want to be the bad guy anymore. He doesn't say he wants to be a hero, he just doesn't want to be the bad guy anymore. Which sounds simple on the surface, yes, but it's actually the biggest thing he's ever said in his life, because for the first time in his life, he's choosing a want that isn't aligned with the script that the world gave him. He just wants something else. He doesn't know what it is yet, but he knows that it's not being the bad guy. And the fact that it took a disguise, him pretending not to be himself, for him to get there, to figure out what he actually wanted, tells you everything about how deep the programming actually went. But Megamind isn't the only one who tried to escape, and this is the part of the movie that nobody really talks about. Going back to when Megamind thought he killed Metroman, we eventually learned that he faked his death. We get to see that Metroman wasn't satisfied with the life that he had and that the city gave him, and he looked at it and decided that he didn't want it anymore and quietly just walked away. When you look into it more, you start to see the parallels between he and Megamind. Metroman had the exact same move as Megamind, but just in the opposite direction. When Megamind's role collapsed, he spiraled and created Titan because he needed that structure back. He couldn't function without the villain and hero dynamic because his whole self was built inside it. Metroman, when he got the chance, just left. On the surface, that looks like Metroman handled it better, but really think about what that means. Metroman had things Megamind never really had. He was beloved, supported, and handed everything from day one. Of course, getting out would be easier for him because he had somewhere soft to land. Megamind, on the other hand, did not. He had a prison yard. It was the same trap, but completely different exits, and only one of them was ever going to be allowed to choose something different, which raises the real question underneath all of this. If both of them wanted out, and the system failed both of them, then who actually built the trap, and why did it work so well for so long? Okay, so here's the thing about how systems actually work. They never announce themselves, they never sit you down and say, hey, we've decided that you're gonna be the bad guy. They just arrange things quietly and consistently over time. Megamind and Metromind didn't choose where they landed. One crashed into a mansion, and the other crashed into a prison yard, and that was it. That was the whole decision. Nobody made it, it just happened. But the world didn't treat it like an accident. The world treated it like information. Metroman grows up around people who loved and believed in him. Every attempt he makes gets praised. Every ability he showed gets celebrated, and the world kept telling him that hey, you belong here, and that you are good and you are meant for this. Megamind, on the other hand, grows up surrounded by the opposite. Every attempt at a connection that he made gets laughed at. Every time he tried something at school and failed, it got treated as proof of what he already is. The world kept telling him that you belong here too, but your here is prison. The feedback builds on itself. The identity gets set in, and by the time either of them are old enough to question it, the role has already become the person. This isn't just a story about animated movies. It shows how labels don't just predict behavior, they shape the environment that shapes the behavior. And then 20 years later, someone points at the outcome and says, hey, we were right all along. But nobody ever asks about who built the pipeline. Megamind saying without Metroman, what's the point? Is the result of spending your entire life inside of a structure that told you that your only purpose was to lose. When that structure disappears, you don't automatically become free. You become disconnected from the only thing that ever gave you shape. And that's terrifying when you have no idea who you are outside of it. The detail I keep coming back to is Minion, because Minion's the only one who genuinely loves Megamind. He's the closest thing that Megamind has ever had to a family. But even Minion had taken on the villain role, and the argument about Roxanne wasn't just about Roxanne, but it's about Minion being scared of what it means if Megamind stops being the bad guy. Because if Megamind isn't the villain anymore, then what is Minion? The system doesn't just trap the person at the center, it traps the person around them too. The city built a villain and a hero, and then called it destiny. But there's another way to look at all of this, and it's one the movie earns too. So before we get into the ending, we need to deal with it first. At the end of the movie, Megamind says something that sounds like a victory speech. He says destiny is not the path given to us, but the path that we choose for ourselves. And I want you all to stay with that for a second, because I think the movie earns it, but only just. Megamind chooses to fight Titan, Megamind chooses to save Roxanne, and he chooses to be the hero when no one else was gonna do it. Those are real choices made by him, and I'm not taking that away from him. But let's be honest here about what he was choosing in between that. Metroman was gone. Titan, a villain he created, was destroying the city. Roxanne, someone who he cared about, was in danger, and the situation had basically arranged itself so that the only other option was watching people he cared about die. How free is a choice when the alternative looks like that? I think the real freedom in this movie isn't the final battle, but it's much more smaller. It's the moment where he told Minion, hey, maybe I don't want to be the bad guy anymore. That was the moment to me when he took full autonomy of his decisions and decided I don't want to be the bad guy anymore. That moment with nothing forcing on it was the only one that was actually his. And so here's where I land on this. The city did make Megamind the villain, not as a metaphor, but literally that's what happened. Two kids landed on Earth the same night. One got a mansion and the other one got a prison yard. And the world read that as the verdict and spent the next 20 years making sure that it stuck. Metroman got to live a life that was built around his best qualities, while Megamind got to live a life that was built around his worst qualities. The system worked exactly the way it was built to work. But here's the other verdict of everything else. At some point, the label stopped forcing him to do what he did, and he kept choosing it anyway. His own narration would tell you that, hey, being the bad guy is the one thing that I'm really good at, so I'm going to choose to be the baddest boy of them all. That's not someone who was trapped, but that's a man who picked up the label that was constantly thrown at him, looked at it, and decided to run with it. He loved every second of it. Nobody made him love it, and when Metro Man disappeared and the structure collapsed, his first instinct wasn't freedom, it was to rebuild the exact same dynamic from scratch. That's not the city trapping him anymore, that's him trapping himself. So which one is it? Did the city make Megamind, or did Megamind actively choose to be a villain? I think it's a bit of both, and that's what makes it uncomfortable. Because yes, the city handed him the role, but he also co-signed it. Metro Man got to go out quietly with no one watching and paid nothing for it. But Megamind, on the other hand, had to earn his freedom in the public, in front of the city that spent their whole lives telling him who he was. Make of that what you will, but let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if Megamind actually had a choice, or the city just gave him a new script and called it destiny. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know who you guys want me to talk about next.